The whispers started in the unlikeliest of places, the kind of rumors that seemed too outrageous to be true, yet too consistent to ignore. Pete Davidson, the comedian known for his sardonic humor and celebrity romances that captured tabloid headlines with the precision of a scalpel, had always been something of a public enigma. Fans adored him for his self-deprecating jokes, his willingness to bear emotional scars on stage, and his uncanny ability to turn tragedy into laughter. Meghan Markle, on the other hand, had already rewritten the rules of public scrutiny. The former actress-turned-duchess had been dissected, criticized, and praised in equal measure, her every move analyzed with an intensity reserved for monarchs and megastars alike. That the two of them were ever rumored to be connected was enough to make the media's pulse race and social media erupt, but what Pete was about to reveal would redefine the boundaries of disbelief. It began quietly. A subtle shift in his interviews, a fleeting glance when asked about dating life, a joke that lingered longer than it should have. Fans speculated endlessly, piecing together cryptic comments, hoping for the scandalous spark that would set the rumor mill ablaze. And for months, the world watched in anticipation. People wondered, could someone like Pete, irreverent and reckless in his humor, truly share anything meaningful with someone like Meghan, who had lived life under the sharp lens of royal scrutiny? Could there exist a connection, a secret world of intimacy and vulnerability that no paparazzi had ever glimpsed? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The answer, as Pete Davidson finally admitted, was a resounding yes, and it was far more intense, more private, and more daring than anyone had dared imagine. In a candid interview that left his publicist's office scrambling for damage control and his fans in a state of wide-eyed disbelief, Pete revealed that he and Meghan had shared a secret relationship, one that was as intense as it was hidden. The revelation did not come in the form of a teasing quip or a vague confession. It came with the kind of specificity that made jaws drop, hearts race, and fingers frantically tap across social media keyboards. They had connected in ways the public could not even dream of, sharing private moments, whispered confessions, and yes, the kind of physical closeness that made the words, "We did it 9 times a day," explode across news headlines with the velocity of a firestorm. For a moment, it was impossible to separate fact from fantasy. People questioned the credibility, argued about the absurdity, and speculated on the logistics. How could someone under the relentless surveillance of the global spotlight maintain such an affair? How could a relationship exist in the shadows with someone as scrutinized as Meghan Markle? The intrigue lay not only in the possibility of the romance, but in the audacity of its intensity, the staggering frequency that Pete had disclosed with a casual candor that only he could pull off. It was the kind of revelation that reshaped public perception overnight. The context of their meeting is just as extraordinary as the confession itself. Sources close to both Pete and Meghan have hinted at initial encounters that were entirely unexpected. In private gatherings meant to celebrate mutual friends, in quiet corners of Los Angeles, in moments where the cameras did not follow, the two would find themselves locked in conversation that transcended typical celebrity chatter. Pete, ever the observer, noticed nuances in Meghan that others either ignored or feared to acknowledge. She was witty, commanding, intelligent, and yet, remarkably, refreshingly, disarmingly approachable. She had been trained in the art of public poise, of smiling under the pressure of a million lenses, but in those fleeting moments, she allowed herself to be real. She let herself laugh without calculation, speak without restraint, and connect without fear of judgment. For Pete, this was intoxicating. It wasn't the glamour of royalty or the sheen of fame that drew him. It was the rawness, the human vulnerability hidden beneath layers of protocol and public expectation. He recognized something familiar in Meghan, a kind of emotional transparency that mirrored the openness he brought to his comedy. And for Meghan, Pete was equally compelling. He offered a world that was unpretentious, that demanded nothing beyond the present moment, that allowed laughter to exist without an audience rating its quality. Their connection, in its earliest stages, was built not on headlines or public approval, but on honesty, shared moments, and an understanding that what existed between them would remain fiercely private. And yet, privacy in their world is fragile. For every whispered conversation, there was the looming possibility of exposure. For every private meeting, there was a shadow of risk. It was the tension of secrecy, the thrill of the forbidden, that added fuel to what would soon become a storm. Pete's revelation was not merely about the number of times they had been physically intimate, though that fact alone dominated headlines. It was about the intensity of their connection, the audacity of the moments they had carved out from a world that offered no privacy, no pause, and no room for genuine spontaneity. It was about two individuals daring to seek normalcy in a life otherwise defined by relentless observation and expectation. The emotional complexity cannot be overstated. Pete spoke of exhilaration intertwined with guilt, laughter shadowed by anxiety, and desire tempered by the awareness of consequences. Meghan, a figure constantly under surveillance, faced the impossible task of navigating secrecy with dignity, of balancing the magnetic pull of a connection that felt electric against the scrutiny that could unravel it all. Their dynamic was more than romantic. It was a study in human resilience, in navigating forbidden terrain with both passion and discretion. Public reaction was instantaneous. Fans erupted in a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and judgment. Social media became a living organism, each comment, meme, and post feeding into a frenzy of speculation and gossip. Analysts dissected interviews, combed through past appearances, and compared timelines, attempting to reconcile the revelation with publicly available information. Every media outlet, no matter how traditional or digital, felt compelled to weigh in, to frame the narrative in a way that would captivate audiences and provoke engagement. The revelation transcended entertainment. It became a social phenomenon, a case study in how two figures could simultaneously capture the imagination and test the boundaries of public perception. Even within Hollywood circles, the confession sent shockwaves. Colleagues and contemporaries of Pete reacted with a mixture of surprise and intrigue. Those who had known him well understood the candidness, the propensity to expose truth regardless of consequence. And yet, even they were startled by the magnitude of the revelation, by the sheer audacity and frequency of the intimacy he described. Meghan's peers, too, were caught in the ripple effect, forced to navigate conversations that bordered on incredulity, balancing support, curiosity, and concern. But beyond the gossip and sensationalism lies a deeper human story, one that Pete himself attempted to articulate amid the chaos. He spoke not of scandal or notoriety, but of connection, of longing, of the rare and fragile moments when two people can exist entirely for each other, even in a world designed to prevent it. There is a universality to this human longing, the desire to be seen, to be understood, and to share something intensely private with another who reciprocates the feeling fully. In revealing this, Pete transformed a potentially salacious story into an exploration of human intimacy under extraordinary circumstances. And yet, the consequences were unavoidable. The public, ever ravenous for scandal, seized upon the most titillating details, missing, perhaps intentionally, the subtler truths buried beneath the sensational numbers. Headlines screamed, memes proliferated, and commentary ranged from incredulous to moralizing. Amidst this, the underlying emotional landscape, the vulnerability, the trust, the unspoken understanding, was obscured. Pete and Meghan's revelation had become a mirror, reflecting society's fascination with the private lives of the famous, and forcing a reckoning with the ethical boundaries of curiosity, judgment, and empathy. At the center of it all, Pete remained candid, unflinching, and unapologetic. He shared the highs and lows, the exhilaration and the anxiety, without resorting to exaggeration for shock value. In doing so, he framed the narrative not as a boast or a provocation, but as a confession, a human being articulating the intensity of connection and desire in a life otherwise defined by scrutiny, expectation, and performance. His words resonated because they were grounded in authenticity, in the emotional truth that underpins all meaningful relationships, whether publicized or private, scandalous or mundane. As the story unfolded, it became clear that this revelation was not just about Pete and Meghan, or about the staggering intimacy they shared. It was a reflection of a cultural moment, of society's simultaneous obsession with and misunderstanding of intimacy, celebrity, and privacy. It forced a conversation about human connection, about the ways in which desire and vulnerability can exist under impossible constraints, and about the capacity for individuals to seek and find extraordinary moments of joy, even when the world expects them to conform, perform, and remain opaque. The day the interview aired, the world seemed to stop. Social media platforms exploded, news outlets scrambled, and ordinary people sat glued to their screens, unable to tear themselves away from the unfolding spectacle. Pete Davidson, usually casual in his media appearances, had delivered a confession that felt both intimate and reckless, a revelation so raw that it bordered on surreal. The implications were staggering, not just for him and Meghan, but for a culture obsessed with celebrity, secrecy, and the tantalizing thrill of forbidden romance. In the hours after the broadcast, insiders reported a flurry of communications. Lawyers, publicists, and agents all moved quickly, attempting to manage the fallout. Meanwhile, fans dissected every word, parsing nuance and inflection, searching for hidden meaning or confirmation of what seemed almost impossible. For some, the numbers themselves, the repeated encounters, the casual admission of intensity, overshadowed the human dimension entirely. For others, the shock was tempered by a strange sense of understanding. Two people, caught in extraordinary circumstances, had carved out a private space to connect in a world that offered no respite. The logistics of their secret meetings were almost as fascinating as the relationship itself. Sources revealed that every encounter had been meticulously planned, not merely for discretion, but for safety. Meghan's life was governed by layers of security, each move carefully choreographed to prevent exposure. Yet, against these odds, moments were found, quiet corners, secluded estates, private flights, where the two could exist away from prying eyes. There was an adrenaline in these arrangements, a pulse-quickening tension that heightened every interaction. It was the thrill of the impossible that made each encounter unforgettable. Friends of both parties spoke cautiously but confirmed the intensity of the relationship. It wasn't just physical, one source noted. They understood each other in a way that went beyond surface-level attraction. There was humor, empathy, a shared sense of being constantly observed and yet wanting to escape. That's rare. Another added, people don't realize how difficult it is for someone in Meghan's position to be fully human. She's always performing, always scrutinized. Pete gave her the freedom to just be. It was not merely a story of romance or desire. It was a story about humanity under pressure. Meghan, trained to navigate a life of protocol and expectation, found in Pete a mirror for her own vulnerability. Pete, exposed daily to the harsh gaze of public opinion and the unpredictable world of comedy, found someone who understood the weight of being constantly watched. In each other, they discovered a rare combination of empathy, understanding, and physical intimacy that defied convention. But with intensity came risk. Rumors inevitably circulated, threatening to unravel carefully maintained secrecy. Each outing, each message, each fleeting public appearance was a potential minefield. The emotional stakes were high. The thrill of intimacy was accompanied by the constant anxiety of exposure, a tension that sharpened every laugh, every touch, every glance. For Pete, this was part of the excitement. An understanding that the relationship existed on the razor's edge between reality and revelation. For Meghan, the stakes were higher, involving not only personal safety but the complex implications of being a public figure who had already endured intense scrutiny. The media response was instantaneous and merciless. Headlines screamed, commentary dissected, and social media became a battlefield of opinion. Some viewed Pete's admission as a betrayal, a reckless disregard for privacy. Others celebrated it as a moment of raw honesty, a glimpse behind the carefully curated facade of celebrity. Debates raged over ethics, morality, and the very nature of human connection. And yet, for all the commentary, the deeper story remained. One of two people seeking authenticity in a world that often rewards performance over reality. In Hollywood, reactions were equally intense. Friends and peers of Pete speculated openly, some with concern, some with envy. How could he expose such a private relationship without destroying it entirely? How could someone navigate intimacy with a person as visible as Meghan Markle without repercussions? These questions underscored the complexity of the situation. Intimacy, especially under public scrutiny, is rarely straightforward. It requires negotiation, trust, and, most of all, an understanding that the outside world may never fully comprehend what exists between two people. The impact on Meghan was no less profound. While she did not respond publicly, insiders described a mixture of frustration, vulnerability, and defiance. The revelation forced her to confront the reality of her life under relentless observation, the constant negotiation between public image and personal truth. There was anger, certainly, at being exposed indirectly, but also an acknowledgement of the uniqueness of the connection she had shared with Pete. A recognition that, for all the attention and scrutiny, some human experiences are too complex to fully control or contain. Pete himself reflected on the consequences, admitting in follow-up interviews that the decision to speak out had not been taken lightly. It wasn't about shock value, he explained. It wasn't a stunt. It was about truth, about acknowledging something real in a world that often pretends everything is simple or black and white. That connection existed, and it was intense. I wanted people to understand that intimacy can exist even under impossible circumstances. His words resonated with many, offering a glimpse of authenticity amid a media landscape that often prioritizes sensationalism over substance. The revelation also highlighted broader cultural tensions. Society is fascinated by intimacy, particularly when it involves individuals perceived as larger than life. Celebrity relationships are dissected, judged, and debated in ways that everyday relationships rarely are. In exposing this relationship, Pete and Meghan challenged assumptions about what is possible, what is acceptable, and what is humanly achievable. They forced a confrontation with questions of desire, privacy, and ethics, highlighting the complex interplay between personal truth and public perception. Perhaps most importantly, the story revealed the emotional depth behind what might superficially appear as mere scandal. Pete and Meghan's relationship was not a simple narrative of attraction and desire. It was a complex interplay of trust, vulnerability, and courage. Each encounter, each moment of physical closeness, was laden with meaning, with the understanding that their connection was not merely physical but profoundly human. It was a testament to the resilience of individuals seeking authenticity in a world that often punishes deviation from expectation. Even as the media frenzy continued, the underlying emotional truths remained compelling. For Pete, the experience reinforced his belief in the power of honesty and emotional openness. For Meghan, it served as a reminder of the delicate balance between public life and private fulfillment, of the risks inherent in seeking connection amidst relentless scrutiny. For the public, it was a revelation that challenged perceptions, provoked discussion, and, for many, elicited a complicated mix of awe, judgment, and empathy. As days turned into weeks, the story continued to unfold, layer by layer. New details emerged, interviews were conducted, and social media discourse remained heated. Yet, beneath the surface, the core of the story persisted. Two individuals, navigating extraordinary circumstances, had forged a connection of rare intensity and authenticity. It was a story of courage, intimacy, and human complexity. A reminder that even in a world dominated by performance, authenticity can still exist, fiercely, powerfully, and unapologetically. The narrative was far from complete. Even as Pete's interview aired and Meghan remained silent publicly, the reverberations were ongoing. Conversations across the globe grappled with the implications, with some heralding it as a moment of radical honesty and others condemning it as reckless exposure. The reality, as always, was more nuanced than headlines could capture. It was not simply a story about sex, secrecy, or celebrity. It was a story about the human need for connection, the courage to embrace vulnerability, and the impossibility of fully controlling how the world perceives what is most private and precious. The aftermath of Pete Davidson's candid confession was immediate and unrelenting. For Meghan Markle, the world had transformed overnight from a familiar landscape of measured public scrutiny into a storm of speculation, judgment, and invasive curiosity. What had been private, intimate, and deeply personal was suddenly laid bare across television screens, news websites, and social media feeds around the world. The sheer velocity of information, commentary, and rumor was overwhelming, a tidal wave that no public figure could hope to control completely. Every outlet seemed to have an angle, and every social media user was an amateur analyst, dissecting not only the facts but the emotional undertones, the pauses, and the inflections of words spoken in an interview that many described as electrifying. Inside the palace walls, whispers began almost immediately. Advisors, staff, and friends struggled to anticipate the potential fallout, balancing loyalty to Meghan with the necessity of managing public perception. The situation was delicate. The British royal family had long learned that even minor revelations could explode into global headlines, often with consequences far beyond what anyone could predict. This revelation, however, was different. It was intensely personal, deeply human, and carried an unfiltered intimacy that was both captivating and potentially explosive. The advisors who had handled previous crises found themselves treading a line they had never navigated before. There was a palpable tension in Meghan's inner circle. Conversations that normally revolved around appearances, schedules, and ceremonial obligations were now dominated by strategy sessions about how to contain the damage, or perhaps more accurately, how to survive the public reckoning. Legal counsel debated the limits of privacy, freedom of speech, and potential defamation claims. Public relations experts drafted statements, carefully measured to avoid overexposure while simultaneously addressing rampant speculation. Security teams recalibrated protocols, recognizing that the revelation could lead to heightened media scrutiny at every public and private movement. Every step, every word, every gesture was now under the microscope in ways previously unimaginable. Across the Atlantic, Pete Davidson felt the weight of his own admission in a uniquely immediate way. While he had expected attention, the scale and intensity of the reaction far surpassed any anticipation. Interviews, podcasts, and media appearances became a whirlwind, each one dissecting, clarifying, or amplifying different aspects of his revelation. In these moments, the boundary between celebrity and personal accountability blurred. He was no longer simply a performer. He had become the center of a narrative that spanned continents, social hierarchies, and cultural conversations. Every anecdote, every story, every hint of intimacy became a point of public fascination and debate. Social media, in particular, became a battlefield. Hashtags surged and fell, memes proliferated, and the public took sides in a debate that was simultaneously intimate and global. Some defended Meghan, emphasizing her right to privacy and the humanity inherent in seeking connection despite extraordinary scrutiny. Others criticized both parties, arguing that the exposure was reckless or that intimacy with a public figure invited inevitable consequences. Opinions clashed violently, and the digital space became a forum for the negotiation of morality, desire, and human behavior. The story was no longer simply about two individuals. It had become a mirror reflecting broader societal anxieties about celebrity, privacy, and the boundaries of personal freedom. In Hollywood, reactions were equally intense, but often different in tone. Peers and colleagues of Pete Davidson acknowledged the boldness of his admission, some expressing admiration for his honesty and others cautioning him about the potential personal and professional fallout. Industry insiders speculated on the implications for Pete's career, wondering how studios, networks, and sponsors might respond to this public exposure of his private life. The conversation often strayed into philosophical territory, examining the modern tension between transparency and discretion in a world where every word can be magnified and every action instantly recorded and shared. Meanwhile, Meghan faced a different set of challenges. The scrutiny she had endured since entering the royal family had prepared her for public pressure, but the deeply personal nature of this revelation struck at a new level. Friends close to her described a mixture of emotions: anger, frustration, vulnerability, and a protective instinct toward the intimacy that had been exposed. The revelation forced Meghan to confront not only public judgment, but also private emotional fallout. The intrusion into a space that had once been sacred and private. She was navigating a labyrinth of media attention, public opinion, and personal emotions, all while maintaining a composed exterior. This situation also created unprecedented tension within her professional network. Advisors and agents found themselves balancing ethical considerations with career implications. The revelation could influence ongoing projects, public engagements, and negotiations. Sponsors, collaborators, and media partners were suddenly reassessing their relationships, gauging potential backlash or support. Every interaction, every public statement, and every private meeting became a point of strategic importance, highlighting how personal revelations in the digital age can reverberate across professional and financial domains in ways previously unimaginable. The legal dimensions were equally complicated. Discussions about confidentiality, defamation, and the limits of public commentary dominated private consultations. Lawyers evaluated the potential for restraining orders, injunctions, or lawsuits to protect personal privacy and reputations. The delicate dance of legality and morality intertwined, revealing the complex interplay between law, media, and personal agency in situations involving public figures. Each move required careful consideration, with the understanding that any misstep could escalate into further exposure, litigation, or reputational damage. Public reaction continued to escalate. Media outlets sought exclusives, leaks surfaced, and anonymous sources were cited in ways that blurred the line between fact and conjecture. Rumors of additional encounters, private messages, and secret trips circulated widely, often based on incomplete or misleading information. Fans and critics alike became amateur investigators, piecing together timelines and events in forums, chat groups, and social media threads. The story was no longer contained to interviews or formal statements. It had become a living, breathing narrative shaped by collective speculation and global attention. Amid this chaos, the emotional toll on both parties was evident. For Meghan, the intrusion into her private life was an enduring stressor, compounding previous experiences with media scrutiny and public criticism. The psychological impact of such exposure, anxiety, hypervigilance, and a sense of relentless observation was compounded by the personal significance of the revealed encounters. Friends noted moments of withdrawal, quiet reflection, and an insistence on private spaces where she could process events without interruption or scrutiny. For Pete, the emotional experience was different, but no less intense. The act of speaking publicly about deeply personal experiences required courage, self-reflection, and the resilience to withstand both praise and condemnation from a global audience. Amid the headlines and social media storms, an underlying narrative began to emerge, one not of scandal or sensationalism, but of the human need for connection and authenticity. Despite the consequences, the relationship represented a pursuit of genuine intimacy, a desire to experience emotional closeness and understanding in a world that often inhibits it. Each interaction, carefully orchestrated or spontaneous, became a testament to the resilience of human desire for companionship and mutual understanding. The revelation forced both the public and media to grapple with the reality that intimacy and connection exist beyond the bounds of conventional morality, social expectation, or celebrity norms. As days stretched into weeks, the narrative evolved. Public commentary shifted, discussions deepened, and the initial shock began to give way to analysis, reflection, and debate. The story had entered a new phase, one where its cultural, psychological, and social implications could be explored in depth. Questions emerged about celebrity privacy, ethical boundaries, human vulnerability, and the social appetite for scandal. For Meghan and Pete, the revelation had irrevocably altered the landscape of their public and private lives, presenting challenges that would continue to unfold in unpredictable and complex ways. The story was far from over. Interviews, social media posts, and industry commentary continued to surface, each layer adding nuance, perspective, and, at times, contradiction. Legal actions were considered, media strategies adjusted, and personal relationships recalibrated. The emotional dimension remained central, how two individuals navigated intense public scrutiny while attempting to preserve private connection, intimacy, and authenticity. It was a lesson in resilience, adaptability, and the often painful intersection of personal truth and public exposure. The reverberations of Pete Davidson's revelations did not stop at social media commentary or Hollywood gossip columns. They reached the very core of Meghan Markle's public image, shaking the foundations of her carefully curated persona. For years, Meghan had navigated the treacherous terrain of public perception with a mixture of poise, strategic communication, and selective transparency. She had learned to anticipate the inevitable scrutiny that comes with marrying into the British royal family, balancing charm, diplomacy, and media messaging with extraordinary skill. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for the intensity and intimacy of this particular exposure. Unlike traditional scandals, which could often be deflected with official statements, philanthropic highlights, or public appearances, this revelation was deeply personal, human, and undeniably raw. It stripped away the protective veneer that Meghan had cultivated, leaving her exposed in ways that felt both invasive and irreversible. Within hours of the revelation, media outlets across the globe scrambled to cover the story. Newspapers and tabloids ran with bold, sensational headlines, often accompanied by dramatic imagery that implied scandal and intrigue. Social media amplified these stories exponentially, with memes, video clips, and commentary circulating at a pace that no public relations team could realistically control. The story transcended entertainment news, penetrating lifestyle sections, political commentary shows, and even psychological analysis segments on cable television. Experts weighed in on the emotional dynamics of the situation, discussing attachment theory, the challenges of intimacy for public figures, and the long-term psychological impact of such exposure. Each perspective added depth to the story, but also heightened the scrutiny Meghan faced. Inside the royal circles, the revelation caused immediate tension. Advisors and senior officials convened urgent meetings to assess potential consequences, both immediate and long-term. They had to consider the impact on Meghan's ongoing engagements, charitable endeavors, and public perception, all while maintaining decorum and adherence to protocol. The palace had weathered numerous controversies before, but this scenario was unprecedented in its personal nature and its capacity to captivate the global public. Conversations that would typically revolve around scheduling, charitable appearances, and diplomatic interactions were now dominated by crisis management strategies. Every word, every gesture, and every public statement had to be calculated with surgical precision to mitigate further fallout. Meghan herself faced a torrent of conflicting emotions. Friends close to her described a storm of frustration, vulnerability, and defiance. She was angered by the invasion into her private life, yet she understood the inevitability of public scrutiny as a public figure. She oscillated between moments of quiet introspection and bursts of assertive decision-making, determined to regain control over her narrative. The support network around her, consisting of close friends, legal advisors, and communication specialists, became her lifeline. They provided guidance on handling media inquiries, crafted nuanced responses for social media, and ensured that every public appearance was meticulously planned to balance transparency with discretion. Yet, even with a strong support system, the emotional toll was undeniable. Meghan had to navigate an environment where every interaction could be misinterpreted, every word dissected, and every gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. Across the Atlantic, Hollywood was abuzz with commentary and speculation. Pete Davidson's admission made him a focal point of media attention, but it also had ripple effects on Meghan's professional and personal connections. Colleagues in the entertainment industry expressed concern for her well-being, while others speculated on the potential impact of the revelation on her projects and public image. Interviews, podcasts, and late-night shows featured discussions that ranged from analytical to sensationalist, each contributing to the public's evolving perception. The boundary between personal disclosure and professional consequence had blurred, creating a landscape in which private experiences could no longer be contained within personal or professional spheres. Every anecdote, no matter how fleeting or seemingly trivial, became material for public consumption and debate. The social media landscape was particularly unforgiving. Hashtags trended, memes proliferated, and forums became battlegrounds for competing narratives. Some users expressed empathy and defended Meghan's right to privacy, emphasizing the human need for connection and the complexities of intimate relationships. Others criticized her, questioning her choices and speculating on her motives. The discourse often veered into polarized extremes, reflecting broader societal debates about celebrity, morality, and privacy. For Meghan, this was both a challenge and an opportunity to shape her narrative and assert control, but a challenge in managing the overwhelming volume of public opinion and the unpredictability of its reception. Within the royal family, the revelation intensified existing tensions. Advisors reported that senior members were acutely aware of the potential damage to the monarchy's image, particularly as Meghan had already been the subject of media scrutiny and public debate for years. Discussions centered on how to balance institutional reputation with individual privacy, a delicate equation that required sensitivity, discretion, and foresight. The royal family had long maintained that the personal lives of its members were intertwined with public perception, but this event highlighted the extreme vulnerabilities inherent in that relationship. The exposure was not simply about reputation. It was about the emotional well-being of individuals who lived under the constant gaze of the world. Legal considerations quickly became a central focus. Lawyers representing Meghan evaluated potential claims for privacy invasion, defamation, and breach of confidence. The challenges were immense. In a digital age where information spreads instantaneously, traditional legal remedies were often reactive and limited in scope. Every statement released, every interview conducted, and every social media post became subject to legal scrutiny, adding another layer of pressure. Legal teams had to anticipate potential scenarios, prepare for worst-case outcomes, and develop strategies that balance protection of personal rights with pragmatic acceptance of public exposure. The law could provide some recourse, but it could not reverse the initial impact or mitigate the emotional fallout. The emotional resonance of the revelation extended beyond Meghan and Pete Davidson. Friends, colleagues, and supporters were drawn into the whirlwind, navigating their own responses to public scrutiny and private concern. The interconnected web of relationships became a microcosm of the broader societal fascination with celebrity, intimacy, and vulnerability. Each person connected to the story, directly or indirectly, faced the challenge of balancing empathy, loyalty, and personal interest, often under intense public observation. The collective experience of navigating such exposure highlighted the human desire for connection, the complexities of public scrutiny, and the enduring impact of personal revelations in an era of global media saturation. Media outlets capitalized on the story's intensity, deploying investigative pieces, opinion columns, and feature articles that explored every conceivable angle. These range from analytical examinations of public behavior and social dynamics to speculative narratives about potential personal consequences and motivations. The coverage was relentless, creating a feedback loop in which public interest drove further reporting, and reporting fueled public fascination. For Meghan, this meant that every attempt to assert privacy or control over the narrative was met with renewed scrutiny, creating a cycle of exposure that was difficult to break. Each headline, each social media post, and each televised discussion contributed to the relentless amplification of the story, making it nearly impossible to compartmentalize the personal and public dimensions of the experience. As the days and weeks progressed, the story evolved. Public opinion shifted, commentary deepened, and the initial shock gave way to more nuanced discussions. Analysts examined the situation through psychological, sociological, and cultural lenses, exploring the intersections of intimacy, privacy, and public life. Debates emerged about the responsibilities of celebrities, the ethics of public disclosure, and the societal fascination with scandal. For Meghan, navigating this evolving landscape required resilience, strategic thinking, and a keen awareness of both the emotional and practical consequences of the revelations. Each decision, each public statement, and each interaction became a critical element in the ongoing negotiation between personal agency and public perception. Amidst the storm, Meghan's inner circle remained a vital source of support and guidance. Friends, advisors, and colleagues provided counsel on managing public appearances, crafting messaging, and maintaining emotional equilibrium. They emphasized the importance of controlling the narrative without compromising personal authenticity, a delicate balance that required constant vigilance. At the same time, Meghan had to contend with the psychological toll of exposure, managing anxiety, stress, and the pervasive sense of being watched and judged. This emotional labor was substantial, highlighting the human cost of living under intense public scrutiny in an era where private experiences are subject to instantaneous global dissemination. The revelation also had a profound impact on Meghan's professional engagements and public persona. Every interview, public appearance, and philanthropic initiative became subject to heightened attention and analysis. Media partners, collaborators, and sponsors closely monitored developments, assessing potential reputational implications and recalibrating strategies accordingly. For Meghan, this meant that her professional life was intricately linked to the unfolding narrative, and each decision carried both personal and public consequences. The interplay between private experience and public perception created a dynamic in which every action, every word, and every appearance was magnified and interpreted through the lens of the broader story. In the days that followed the revelation, Meghan Markle found herself navigating a maze of emotional turbulence and strategic necessity. The intense glare of public scrutiny did not allow for moments of private contemplation or solace. Even within the sanctity of her personal spaces, she felt the persistent echo of a world that had become both observer and jury. Friends described her as oscillating between calm deliberation and bursts of fiery frustration, a pattern driven by the dual pressures of protecting her personal dignity while simultaneously managing the public narrative that seemed determined to redefine her identity. The challenge was not merely about damage control. It was about survival in an environment where perception and reality intertwined so tightly that separating the two became an almost impossible task. Meghan's relationship with Prince Harry, already subject to constant examination, became a focal point for speculation. Advisors within the royal and media circles closely watched their interactions, interpreting every gesture and tone for evidence of tension, support, or fracture. For Meghan, Harry was both a source of comfort and a reminder of the limitations imposed by her circumstances. They communicated extensively, often late into the night, navigating the delicate balance between personal reassurance and strategic alignment. Each conversation carried weight, with the potential to influence not only their private lives but also their public image. Harry, aware of the stakes, became increasingly protective yet pragmatic, encouraging Meghan to assert control where possible while mitigating the risk of further public entanglement. The psychological impact of this exposure was significant. Meghan, who had long been accustomed to public attention, recognized that this situation was fundamentally different from prior controversies. This was deeply personal, touching on intimate aspects of her life in ways that previous media narratives had skirted. She experienced a heightened sense of vulnerability, compounded by the knowledge that every emotional response could be scrutinized, analyzed, and sensationalized. Her advisors emphasized the importance of maintaining composure, yet they also recognized the human necessity of emotional processing. Therapy sessions became a critical component of her coping strategy, providing a structured space to navigate feelings of betrayal, anxiety, and the heavy burden of constant observation. The strategic considerations extended beyond personal well-being to encompass professional and public responsibilities. Meghan's philanthropic projects, media engagements, and creative initiatives all had to be re-evaluated in light of the unfolding narrative. Every decision carried the dual weight of practical consequence and symbolic significance. Public appearances required meticulous planning, with attention not only to the message conveyed but also to the subtle implications of demeanor, dress, and interaction. Each gesture could be amplified or misinterpreted, reinforcing or undermining the narrative that had now taken on a life of its own. Meghan's team worked tirelessly to anticipate potential pitfalls, crafting strategies that balanced transparency, authenticity, and protection of personal boundaries. The ripple effects of the situation extended to Meghan's broader network of friends, colleagues, and supporters. Individuals in close proximity were drawn into the whirlwind, navigating their own responses to both the revelations and the intense public scrutiny. Supporters expressed concern and offered counsel, while others struggled with the ethical dilemmas of engagement, whether to speak publicly in defense, provide private guidance, or remain neutral to protect their own reputations. The interconnected nature of these relationships underscored the complexity of celebrity life in a media-saturated environment, where personal connections could simultaneously provide comfort and complicate public perception. Social media platforms became battlegrounds for narrative control, with users both defending and critiquing Meghan in real time. The virality of posts, comments, and videos created an environment where misinformation and speculation could spread faster than verified facts. Every post she or her team released was subject to intense scrutiny, with even minor deviations from expected behavior dissected for hidden meaning. The pressure to respond effectively and quickly created a near-constant state of tension, highlighting the relentless demands placed on public figures in an era dominated by instantaneous communication. Meghan's approach was measured. She prioritized consistency and clarity, seeking to guide the narrative without appearing reactive or defensive. Within the royal family, internal dynamics shifted subtly yet perceptibly. Senior members observed the situation closely, weighing the potential implications for institutional reputation against the well-being of the individuals involved. Advisors documented patterns, analyzed media reactions, and prepared contingency plans, all while maintaining discretion. The stakes were immense. The monarchy's public image, historically anchored in stability and decorum, was now intersecting with a highly personal and emotionally charged narrative. The delicate balance of loyalty, public expectation, and institutional continuity required careful navigation, demanding that each decision be informed by both strategic foresight and empathetic understanding. Legal strategy became an essential element of managing the fallout. Meghan's legal team assessed potential avenues for redress, including claims related to privacy violations, defamation, and media malpractice. The challenges were considerable, given the speed at which information spread and the global scale of public engagement. Legal advisors emphasized that while courts could provide remedies, they could not erase the emotional impact or fully control public perception. This reality reinforced the importance of proactive narrative management, strategic communication, and careful management of public engagements to minimize further exposure and preserve credibility. The personal toll on Meghan was compounded by the relentless media cycle. Traditional news outlets, digital platforms, and broadcast channels all competed to provide new angles, exclusive insights, and commentary, amplifying the intensity of scrutiny. Analysts dissected body language, tone of voice, and even social media interactions for evidence of internal state and intent. Each observation, regardless of its accuracy or relevance, contributed to a narrative ecosystem that was difficult to influence or contain. For Meghan, this meant navigating an environment where every action could have symbolic weight, and every inaction could be interpreted as tacit acknowledgement or weakness. Despite the challenges, Meghan displayed remarkable resilience. Her approach combined careful planning, emotional intelligence, and strategic assertiveness. She leveraged trusted advisors and allies to navigate complex interactions while maintaining a public persona that balanced poise, accessibility, and controlled vulnerability. Her engagement with charitable causes, media projects, and personal initiatives continued, but with heightened attention to messaging and impact. The experience reinforced the importance of controlling narrative elements, managing perception without compromising personal authenticity, and maintaining strategic focus amidst intense pressure. The broader cultural implications of the situation were also significant. Public discourse around Meghan's experiences prompted debates about privacy, gender, celebrity, and the ethics of media coverage. Social commentators, journalists, and academic analysts explored the intersections of personal exposure, public expectation, and the responsibilities of media institutions. Discussions addressed the broader societal fascination with intimate revelations, the ethical boundaries of public scrutiny, and the psychological effects of sustained exposure on individuals in the public eye. Meghan's circumstances became a case study in the complexities of contemporary fame, highlighting both the opportunities and vulnerabilities.